Evidence, Certainty, and the Search for God. Introduction. Is there any doubt about God? Since time immemorial, humanity has never disputed the existence of God. With very few exceptions, it has always believed in the existence and omnipotence of God. The first human, Adam, was a prophet of God, and belief was embedded in his very nature. Subsequent generations also believed in God without ever doubting his existence and accepted it as self-evident, an undeniable truth as obvious as any observable fact. They only disputed about the nature of the Creator and the manner of his worship. The word atheos, of Greek origin, first meant ungodly, and later evolved to mean without God, or denier of God. In modern parlance, an atheist is a person who denies the existence of God, believing that the universe has no creator, no designer, and no purpose. They would argue that nature is in constant flux, and that human beings are as accidental and incidental as anything else. They would also claim that there is no empirical evidence for the existence of God and no rational basis to believe in him, arguing since God cannot be seen, he simply does not exist. Atheism, as a distinct worldview, is a very recent phenomenon. That is to say that its prevalence on a political, cultural, and social level is unprecedented in history. Whilst there are scattered records of individual atheists in history, these instances were typically isolated and lacked the organized movements, philosophical frameworks, and widespread acceptance that characterize contemporary atheism. Only in recent centuries, especially with the rise of secularism, scientific rationalism, and modern political ideologies, has atheism emerged as a prominent and influential intellectual force. The Enlightenment, which began in the early 18th century, marked the first time atheism became an intellectually acceptable belief in Western thought. Several historical developments converged to make this possible: the rise of Renaissance humanism and its renewed interest in the works of classical antiquity, the fall of the Roman, Byzantine Empire, the emergence of the Protestant Reformation, and the invention of the printing press. Together, these shifts created fertile ground for intellectual upheaval. This, in turn, produced two major trends that drew many towards agnosticism and atheism: the growing conflict between new scientific discoveries and Christian beliefs, and the rise of critical approaches to biblical interpretation, or hermeneutics. Academics, scientists, and philosophers increasingly found that new scientific and archaeological discoveries contradicted church teachings, while biblical criticism revealed that ancient manuscripts had been corrupted over time. These discoveries shook the foundations of Christianity's authority. If the Bible, claimed to be the Word of God, was flawed, then both its divine origin and the Church's legitimacy came into question. The result was the emergence of a secular worldview among Europe's educated classes, one that relegated religious beliefs to the private sphere. Renaissance humanism and the collapse of the Roman Empire. During the 14th and 15th centuries, there was a significant revival in the study of classical antiquity, beginning in Italy and gradually spreading across Western Europe. This period witnessed the rise of Renaissance humanism, a movement deeply influenced by the rich legacy of Islamic scholarship and literature. The intellectual achievements of Muslim scholars helped ignite a renewed appetite for learning across Europe. With widespread translations of Arabic texts, this intellectual ascendancy paralleled military realities, repeated crusader defeats, and ultimately the fall of the Roman Empire to the Ottomans in 1453. Confronted with setbacks on both cultural and military fronts, many Europeans began asking profound ontological and existential questions. Why had the Muslim world triumphed? Why had Christian forces suffered repeated defeats? Was there something fundamentally wrong in their beliefs? European observers noted the Muslims' unwavering devotion to the worship of one God and the widespread literacy of the Quran as a key factor. Men and women of all social classes had direct access to the Quran and believed it to be the literal word of God. This contrast prompted Europeans to reconsider their own religious structures, a shift exemplified by the Protestant Reformation. Sparked by Martin Luther, a German monk who challenged the Catholic Church's authority, the Reformation argued that true religious authority lay not in tradition or ecclesiastical hierarchy, but in the Bible itself. Luther maintained that the teachings of the Church and its leaders must be tested against Scripture, the sole and ultimate authority for Christians. Luther himself remarked, "We see that the religion of Prophet Muhammad is far more splendid in ceremonies, and, I might almost say, in customs, than ours, even including that of the religious or all the clerics. The modesty and simplicity of their food, clothing, dwellings, and everything else, as well as the fasts, prayers, and common gatherings of the people that this book reveals, are nowhere seen among us. Or rather, it is impossible for our people to be persuaded to them. Furthermore, which of our monks, be it a Carthusian, they who wish to appear the best, or a Benedictine, is not put to shame by the miraculous and wondrous abstinence and discipline among their religious? Our religious are mere shadows when compared to them, and our people clearly profane when compared to theirs. Not even true Christians, not Christ himself, not the apostles or prophets ever exhibited so great a display. This is the reason why many persons so easily depart from faith in Christ for Mohammedanism, and adhere to it so tenaciously. I sincerely believe that no papist, monk, cleric, or their equal in faith would be able to remain in their faith if they should spend 3 days among the Turks. Here I mean those who seriously desire the faith of the Pope and who are the best among them. Gutenberg's printing press. Furthermore, the invention of the printing press by German innovator Johannes Gutenberg had an immeasurable impact, igniting a social and cultural revolution. Before its arrival, books were copied by hand, an expensive and time-consuming process that had confined reading in Europe to monasteries and the elite. Gutenberg's invention revolutionized the rapid and mass production of books, dramatically accelerating the spread of ideas that would have otherwise taken centuries to cement. It fueled both the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment, reshaping Europe's spiritual and intellectual landscape. Enlightenment thinking gave rise to new ideas about God not grounded in traditional Christian epistemology, most notably deism, the belief that God exists but does not intervene supernaturally in the universe. Biblical hermeneutics and the clash with the Church. 19th-century historians are in general agreement that two major developments accelerated the decline of religious belief in Europe: the rise of modern science and the emergence of critical approaches to biblical hermeneutics. For centuries, Christians viewed the Bible as the embodiment of literal and infallible truth. But with the rise of modern epistemologies, there emerged a quest for certainty and precision, driven by a desire to liberate knowledge from inherited or received wisdom, which came to be viewed as uncertain, unreliable, and unverifiable. The Bible began to be examined through historical and scientific lenses. Scholars began to doubt its historical accuracy, uncovering internal inconsistencies, external discrepancies, and conflicts with emerging scientific discoveries. The effort to reconcile revelation with reason deepened tensions with the Church. Spencer notes, Scripture and Nature were two books, the former revealing God's will, the latter his power. While this legitimized the study of nature, it also presented a potential problem. What if one disagreed with the other? How would good Christians negotiate different readings and conclusions of these two books? In addition to these developments was the pressing issue of the Bible's textual preservation. There were major efforts to identify and reconstruct the most authentic ancient manuscripts. The most famous was the systematic study of biblical manuscripts by German scholars, which began in the late 18th century with the rise of higher criticism, or the historical critical method. Scholars such as Johann Jakob Griesbach, 1745 to 1812, were among the first who organized comparisons of New Testament manuscripts, identifying textual families such as the Alexandrian, Western, and Byzantine, in the period roughly between 1770 and 1810. By the late 1800s, scholars had noted over 150,000 textual variants in the New Testament, a figure that would rise to around 500,000 by the 21st century. The culmination of this research represented over 200 years of sustained scholarly manuscript analysis. Naturally, such findings shattered Christians' confidence in their sacred texts. How could they be certain that words they read were truly the words of God? How could they trust the doctrines of the Church? For many, this erosion of trust deepened the growing divide between faith and reason, between revelation and human intellect. This crisis of confidence in biblical authority stands in sharp contrast to the Quranic experience. Dr. Muhammad Hamidullah recounts, "Some time back, the Christian clergy of Germany thought of collaring the ancient manuscripts of the Bible. As the original Bible in Aramaic is extinct, the oldest available Bible is in Greek. It is from Greek that the Bible has been translated into all other languages of the world. The Greek manuscripts, they thought, should be collected and compared with each other. Thus, all the Greek manuscripts of the Bible in the world, whether complete or incomplete, were collected. The report published after this global exercise stated, some 200,000 contradictory narrations have been found. And then there is the sentence, of these 1/8 are of an important nature. This is the story of the Bible. After the publication of the report, some people probably felt jealous of the Quran in the University of Munich. An institute for Quranic research was set up. The idea was to collect all the oldest available copies of the Holy Quran in original or photocopies. The process of the collection lasted for 3 generations. When I was at the University of Paris in 1933, the third director of the institute, Mr. Pretzel, came to Paris to get photocopies of all the ancient manuscripts of the Holy Quran at the Public Library of Paris. The professor told me personally at the time, 1933, that the institute had 43,000 photocopies of the Holy Quran and that the work of the collation was proceeding apace. During the Second World War, a bomb hit the building of the institute, destroying the archive, the library, and the staff. An interim report was published shortly before the beginning of the Second World War, stated, although some mistakes calligraphy had been detected in the manuscripts, not a single discrepancy in the text had been discovered. A calligraphic or typographical error found in one manuscript does not recur in another. Suppose, for example, that in a manuscript of the Quran, one word is missing from the text. This mistake will remain confined only to that very manuscript. The rest will have the complete text. The omission is the result of an oversight on the part of the scribe who has inadvertently missed a word. Should there be a difference in narration, it will be found in many manuscripts. This is not the case of the Quran. All the events narrated so far categorically prove the divine claim in the Quran. Verily, it is we who have revealed the reminder, and verily we are its guardian. Post-Christianity. The rise of a post-Christian Europe marked a profound shift in the continent's spiritual landscape. Germany, France, Britain, Russia, and the newly formed United States each developed distinctive expressions of atheism, shaped less by differences in ideas than by the unique religious and political character of their societies. Collectively, the Enlightenment's challenge to the dominance of the Church paved the way for both agnosticism and atheism to enter public life. Freed from biblical teachings, new ideologies emerged to fill the religious, moral, and intellectual vacuum. Secularism, liberalism, nationalism, capitalism, communism, feminism, and evolutionary theory. Together they redefined the Western worldview into one that sought to explain existence without recourse to God. Effect on the Muslim world. Colonialism, globalization, and the digital revolution have all carried Western values into the Muslim world. Ideas that took centuries to take root in the West can now penetrate Muslim societies instantly, influencing education, culture, and belief. This exposure has led a growing number of young Muslims to begin to question the existence of God. In response, Muslim scholars and speakers have typically used philosophical rebuttals to prove the existence of God. While such arguments have value, they overlook an important reality. Most people do not think in abstract philosophical terms. Arguments framed purely in philosophy can appear convoluted and unconvincing, not because they lack substance, but because they fail to connect with those seeking clear, logical, and practical reasoning. Many young Muslims are looking for answers that are clear, intuitive, and align with their everyday experiences, rather than detached academic discussions that feel distant from their reality. Atheism Unpacked: Key Arguments. Though atheism is not defined by a specific set of doctrines or dogmas, There are some common arguments that atheists often present to support their views. Firstly, they argue that there is a lack of empirical evidence to support the existence of God, that there is no evidence that can be gained via observation, experimentation, or direct sensory experience. That is, there is no scientific evidence for the existence of God. Secondly, the problem of evil. They question how the existence of a merciful and all-powerful God can be reconciled with the existence of evil and suffering in the world. They state that the presence of suffering and injustice is incompatible with the existence of God. Thirdly, inconsistencies in religious texts. Atheists criticize the contradictions found within religious texts, internally and externally. They argue that these inconsistencies cast doubt on the reliability and divine authorship of these texts, undermining their claims about the existence of God. Fourthly, atheists highlight the cultural and historical context in which religious beliefs arise. They state that these beliefs can be explained as a product of culture and human psychology. Fifthly, atheists invoke the theory of evolution as naturalistic explanations for the diversity and complexity of life on Earth without the need for a creator. It provides an explanation for the innumerable life forms, their adaptations to different environments, and the complex structures and functions observed in living organisms. It does not require the involvement of God, but rather attributes the development of species to natural mechanisms such as mutation, genetic variation, natural selection, and environmental factors. Evidence that leaves no doubt. Having outlined some of the principal arguments advanced by atheism, this book now presents the case for the existence of God grounded in reason and evidence. It confronts the major atheist arguments head-on, exposing their flaws and inconsistencies, and demonstrates that belief in God is not a matter of blind faith, but the most rational conclusion to which the evidence leads. Evidence that is not merely plausible, but undeniable. To guide the reader through this journey from doubt to certainty, the book is organized into 13 chapters, each addressing a distinct dimension of the search for God. Chapter 1 begins by exploring how human beings discover God through their natural disposition, intellect, and revelation. Chapter 2 examines the signs embedded throughout the universe, showing how reflection transforms these signs into conviction. Chapter 3 discusses the nature of doubt, its origins, and the path to attaining certainty. Chapter 4 evaluates the theory of evolution, exposing its scientific weaknesses and how it collapses under its own weight. Chapter 5 turns to the mathematical structure of the universe and highlights its connection to the human mind. Chapter 6 presents scientific evidence that points to a created universe with intentional design. From there, Chapter 7 introduces the major philosophical arguments for God's existence and considers their strengths and limitations. Chapter 8 then examines the consequences of atheism and its effects on morality, society, and human value. Chapter 9 explores the concept of the fitrah, the natural disposition that inclines every human being toward belief in God. Chapter 10 focuses on the miracle of human language and its implications for design and purpose. Chapter 11 presents the Quran as God's revelation, demonstrating its miraculous nature. Chapter 12 discusses manifestations of the unseen and how these experiences point to the power of God. Finally, Chapter 13 provides a comprehensive discussion of who God is, His names and attributes, and what it means to know, love, and draw near to Him. The question of God's existence is the most profound and existential question we face. Even in an age of extraordinary scientific and technological progress, it remains the most fundamental, shaping how we understand truth, ourselves, and the purpose of life. This question strikes at the essence of our identity. Are we the creation of an all-knowing God, or the accidental outcome of blind random processes in a universe indifferent to our existence? The answer to this question determines not only how we see the world, but how we live within it, our purpose, our values, and our ultimate destination. For if God exists, then everything changes. Life has an ultimate purpose, morality gains absolute grounding, and death is not the end. But if He does not, then all meaning, truth, and morality collapse into mere human construct. For those who sincerely seek the truth, Signs of God are everywhere, both within and beyond us. Doubt may cloud the heart, but reason, revelation, and reality all point unmistakably in one direction: that God is, and in this there is no doubt. Final note. All praise and thanks are due to God for granting me the opportunity to write this book in defense of belief in His existence, power, and greatness. Nothing in this work would have been possible were it not for His mercy and countless blessings, for which I am eternally grateful. I would also like to thank all those who helped and offered valuable feedback. May God accept it from you. This book is far from perfect, and there are many ways in which it could have been improved. It is, however, a sincere attempt to help reconnect people with their Creator. Whatever is correct in this book is from God alone, and any errors are entirely my own. I ask God for His forgiveness. While I believe that every sincere seeker can benefit from this book, its tone and approach are primarily directed towards Muslims who are struggling with atheism. It is my hope that this work may serve as part of a conclusive and perfected proof from God. May God accept it. O God, grant us a faith so certain that no doubt remains in our hearts about your existence. Let us live as though we see you, and let that certainty be a fountain of your mercy and love. Choose us to be your guests in paradise, and make the best day of our lives the day we meet you. Lastly, send your peace and blessings upon our Prophet, Muhammad, and upon his family and all his companions. Chapter 1. Discovery of God. The universe is not silent. Its order, precision, and beauty speak to the mind that contemplates it. From the laws that govern motion to the fine balance that sustains life, every aspect of creation points beyond itself. This chapter explores how the physical world becomes a mirror reflecting the reality of God. Existential and ontological questions. Throughout history, humans have grappled with three fundamental questions. 1. Who created me and everything around me? 2. What is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? 3. What awaits me after death? The first question explores the source of being and the nature of the Creator. The second explores the meaning and purpose of existence. The third confronts the mystery of what lies beyond this life and the search for certainty about the hereafter. Islam teaches that God has granted three essential means for discovering, knowing, and loving Him. 1. Natural disposition. 2. Intellect or rational thinking. 3. Revelation. All humans are born with an innate disposition towards belief. This is akin to default settings on a mobile phone, programmed and calibrated from the very beginning. Within these settings, there is an inherent recognition of God's existence, greatness, and oneness. This makes a person naturally inclined towards the worship of God alone, an idea rooted in the Quranic concept of the primordial covenant. Alongside this, God has endowed every human being with intellect, which employs the faculties of perception and reflection, sight and hearing, in the process of rational understanding. We use these to navigate the world around us, to learn, to decide, to discern right from wrong, and to recognize truth when we encounter it. Yet this natural state with which we are all born can be affected by our actions, particularly by sin. The impact of sin is that it corrupts and distorts the natural state, just as a virus disrupts the normal operation of a device. Over time, this corruption clouds the heart, dulls the intellect, and blinds a person to the truth that was once self-evident within them. While the natural disposition and rational thinking can lead a person to recognize the existence of God, His greatness, and the necessity of worship, they remain limited in scope. They can infer that God exists and possesses perfection, but they cannot, on their own, reveal the details of His names, attributes, or what He loves and commands. To attain certainty and precise knowledge of the divine, revelation is needed. Ibn Taymiyyah writes, "The prophets brought that which could not be known by reason alone." Dr. Umar al-Ashqar adds, "The relation of the revelation to the intellect is like that of the sun or light to the eye. If revelation is kept away from reason, one will not benefit from his reason. Just as a person cannot benefit from his eyes if he lives in darkness, but when the sun sends its light, he is able to benefit from his eyes. In addition, revelation also serves as the final proof. against a person, leaving no excuse before God on the day of judgment, because it delivers the truth with such clarity that denial can arise only from arrogance, not ignorance. In essence, these three faculties lead a person from mere awareness to true recognition of God. Through natural disposition, the heart inclines toward faith. Through reason, the mind perceives order and wisdom in creation. And through revelation, the truth is unveiled in full clarity. Thus, the journey of discovering God is neither blind belief nor pure speculation, but a path affirmed by reason, rooted in our nature and illuminated by divine guidance. The universe, the source of God realization. It is important to recognize that the journey to discover God begins only by His permission. God guides to His light whom He wills. He guides and selects those who sincerely seek Him. The process of discovery, known as God realization, represents the pinnacle of spiritual and intellectual development. It is a quest for the ultimate truth, ultimate love, and ultimate happiness. With the tools God has given us, we observe and study the universe, which is a boundless library full of signs and lessons, with every particle serving as an encyclopedia of God realization. This instills in a person a profound awareness of both the creation and the Creator. Someone who attains this level of God realization becomes deeply reflective and serious, and it awakens a sense of responsibility to align one's life with divine purpose. They view everything with heightened insight, engaging in deep introspection regarding their behavior and interactions. They become students of the universe, reading its signs as verses that increase their knowledge of the Creator. God says in the Quran, "I did not create the jinn and mankind except to worship me." Bagawi remarks, "This is the best of what has been said, for had He not created them, they would never have known of His existence or divinity." Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali writes, "God created creation so that they may worship Him through love, fear, and hope of Him. God said, 'I created jinn and men only that they may worship me.' However, God can only be worshipped by possessing knowledge of Him, which is why He created the heavens and the earth and all that is between them as an indicator to His divinity and majesty. About this God says, 'God it is who has created 7 heavens, and of the earth a similar number. His command descends through them, so that you may know God has power over all things, and that He encompasses all things in knowledge.' God tells us that humans were created solely to worship Him and endowed them with the elevated intellect required for insight necessary to perceive His signs. True realization of God is not attained through mere repetition or silent meditation upon His name. Such practices alone cannot produce God realization. Rather, it arises from profound intellectual and spiritual discovery, rooted in deep reflection and understanding. God realization is like a seed that grows into a majestic tree. As it matures, it transforms and develops the believer's character. Through both reason and intuition, the believer attains a profound conviction in God and a deeper appreciation of His greatness. God realization does not remain confined to the intellect. It overflows into the heart, transforming knowledge into feeling and emotion. When understanding matures into realization, the heart can no longer remain still, and its tears become the testimony of inner awakening. God says, "And when they hear what has been revealed to the messenger, you see their eyes overflowing with tears because of what they have recognized of the truth. They say, 'Our Lord, we have believed, so register us among the witnesses.'" The discovery of God cannot be inherited like a family jewel passed from one generation to the next. God realization is ultimately a deeply personal experience, achieved solely through individual effort and personal striving. Everyone's journey to divine understanding is personal and cannot be transferred or inherited from others. The eternal journey. One should understand that without God realization, one remains in a state of darkness. It is the spirit of inquiry that illuminates the path to knowledge, and this inquisitive spirit is essential for achieving God realization. Through it, a person ascends to a higher level of existence, gaining a true understanding of reality. It makes us worthy of being in the company of angels and enables us to receive divine guidance. Though it begins at a specific point in time, the pursuit of understanding the signs of God cannot be achieved in a short time. Death does not signify the end of this journey. Rather, the believer's exploration of God realization continues forever. A person's status in the hereafter will correspond to the level of their realization of God in the world. In paradise, the most fulfilling experience will be to dwell in the garden of God realization, where the inhabitants will delight in the endless discovery of God's infinite wonders. The present world only serves as preparation for this eternal pursuit of divine knowledge and joy in paradise. In essence, the formula for God realization is simple. The depth of one's reflection determines the height of God realization. The more deeply the mind contemplates, the more fully the heart awakens to the truth of the Creator. Thus, the believer's journey of discovery is a sacred return to the one who said, "We shall show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves, until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth." The more one contemplates, the clearer the truth becomes. And when this truth settles in the heart comes to life. Every thought a remembrance, every moment a step closer to God. Existential and ontological questions. Throughout history, humans have grappled with three fundamental questions. Who created me and everything around me? What is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? What awaits me after death? The first question explores the source of being and the nature of the Creator. The second explores the meaning and purpose of existence. The third confronts the mystery of what lies beyond this life and the search for certainty about the hereafter. Islam teaches that God has granted three essential means for discovering, knowing, and loving Him. 1. Natural disposition. 2. Intellect/rational thinking. 3. Revelation. All humans are born with an innate disposition towards belief. This is akin to default settings on a mobile phone, programmed and calibrated from the very beginning. Within these settings, there is an inherent recognition of God's existence, greatness, and oneness. This makes a person naturally inclined towards the worship of God alone, an idea rooted in the Quranic concept of the primordial covenant. Alongside this, God has endowed every human being with intellect, which employs the faculties of perception and reflection, sight and hearing, in the process of rational understanding. We use these to navigate the world around us, to learn, to decide, to discern right from wrong, and to recognize truth when we encounter it. Yet this natural state with which we are all born can be affected by our actions, particularly by sin. The impact of sin is that it corrupts and distorts the natural state, just as a virus disrupts the normal operation of a device. Over time, this corruption clouds the heart, dulls the intellect, and blinds a person to the truth that was once self-evident within them. While the natural disposition and rational thinking can lead a person to recognize the existence of God, His greatness and the necessity of worship, they remain limited in scope. They can infer that God exists and possesses perfection, but they cannot, on their own, reveal the details of His names, attributes, or what He loves and commands. To attain certainty and precise knowledge of the divine, revelation is needed. Ibn Taymiyyah writes, "The prophets brought that which could not be known by reason alone." Dr. Umar al-Ashkar adds, "The relation of the revelation to the intellect is like that of the sun or light to the eye. If revelation is kept away from reason, one will not benefit from his reason. Just as a person cannot benefit from his eyes if he lives in darkness, but when the sun sends its light, he is able to benefit from his eyes." In addition, revelation also serves as the hujjah, the final proof, against a person, leaving no excuse before God on the day of judgment, because it delivers the truth with such clarity that denial can arise only from arrogance, not ignorance. In essence, these three faculties lead a person from mere awareness to true recognition of God. Through natural disposition, the heart inclines toward faith. Through reason, the mind perceives order and wisdom in creation. And through revelation, the truth is unveiled in full clarity. Thus, the journey of discovering God is neither blind belief nor pure speculation, but a path affirmed by reason, rooted in our nature and illuminated by divine guidance. The universe, the source of God realization. It is important to recognize that the journey to discover God begins only by His permission. God guides to His light whom He wills. He guides and selects those who sincerely seek Him. The process of discovery, known as God realization, represents the pinnacle of spiritual and intellectual development. It is a quest for the ultimate truth, ultimate love, and ultimate happiness. With the tools God has given us, we observe and study the universe, which is a boundless library full of signs and lessons, with every particle serving as an encyclopedia of God realization. This instills in a person a profound awareness of both the creation and the Creator. Someone who attains this level of God realization becomes deeply reflective and serious, and it awakens a sense of responsibility to align one's life with divine purpose. They view everything with heightened insight, engaging in deep introspection regarding their behavior and interactions. They become students of the universe, reading its signs as verses that increase their knowledge of the Creator. God says in the Quran, "I did not create the jinn and mankind except to worship me." Baghawi remarks, after quoting this in his tafsir, "This is the best of what has been said. For had he not created them, they would never have known of his existence or divinity." Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali writes, "God created creation so that they may worship him through love, fear, and hope of him. God said, 'I created jinn and men only that they may worship me.' However, God can only be worshipped by possessing knowledge of him, which is why he created the heavens and the earth and all that is between them as an indicator to his divinity and majesty." About this, God says, "God it is who has created 7 heavens, and of the earth a similar number. His command descends through them, so that you may know God has power over all things, and that he encompasses all things in knowledge." 65:12. God tells us that humans were created solely to worship him and endowed them with the elevated intellect required for insight necessary to perceive his signs. True realization of God is not attained through mere repetition or silent meditation upon his name. Such practices alone cannot produce God realization. Rather, it arises from profound intellectual and spiritual discovery, rooted in deep reflection and understanding. God realization is like a seed that grows into a majestic tree. As it matures, it transforms and develops the believer's character. Through both reason and intuition, the believer attains a profound conviction in God and a deeper appreciation of his greatness. God realization does not remain confined to the intellect. It overflows into the heart, transforming knowledge into feeling and emotion. When understanding matures into realization, the heart can no longer remain still, and its tears become the testimony of inner awakening. God says, "And when they hear what has been revealed to the messenger, you see their eyes overflowing with tears because of what they have recognized of the truth. They say, 'Our Lord, we have believed, so register us among the witnesses.'" The discovery of God cannot be inherited like a family jewel passed from one generation to the next. God realization is ultimately a deeply personal experience, achieved solely through individual effort and personal striving. Everyone's journey to divine understanding is personal and cannot be transferred or inherited from others. The eternal journey. One should understand that without God realization, one remains in a state of darkness. It is the spirit of inquiry that illuminates the path to knowledge, and this inquisitive spirit is essential for achieving God realization. Through it, a person ascends to a higher level of existence, gaining a true understanding of reality. It makes us worthy of being in the company of angels and enables us to receive divine guidance. Though it begins at a specific point in time, the pursuit of understanding the signs of God cannot be achieved in a short time. Death does not signify the end of this journey. Rather, the believer's exploration of God realization continues forever. A person's status in the hereafter will correspond to the level of their realization of God in the world. In paradise, the most fulfilling experience will be to dwell in the garden of God realization, where the inhabitants will delight in the endless discovery of God's infinite wonders. The present world only serves as preparation for this eternal pursuit of divine knowledge and joy in paradise. In essence, the formula for God realization is simple. The depth of one's reflection determines the height of God realization. The more deeply the mind contemplates, the more fully the heart awakens to the truth of the Creator. Thus, the believer's journey of discovery is a sacred return to the One who said, "We shall show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves, until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth." The more one contemplates, the clearer the truth becomes, And when this truth settles in the heart comes to life, every thought a remembrance, every moment a step closer to God. Chapter 2. Signs Ayat. Indeed, in the heavens and the earth are signs for the believers, and in the creation of yourselves and the animals that he disperses are signs for those who have certainty. If the universe were devoid of meaning, its harmony would be inexplicable. Every atom, every galaxy, and every pulse of life points beyond itself to an unseen intelligence. The Quran calls these phenomena signs, each whispering the same truth. God is near. Here we explore how these signs form the bridge between observation and faith, cultivating recognition of God through reason and reflection alike. The universe speaks. God created us to discover him and placed before us the heavens and the earth as signs of his power and greatness. These signs invite every sincere heart to seek a relationship with him and awaken a longing to see him. For the believer, life becomes a rich tapestry of such signs and offers opportunities to deepen that relationship. Ibn al-Qayyim writes, "There are two paths to knowing God: reflecting upon his acts of creation and contemplating his revealed signs with understanding. The former are his witnessed signs, and the latter are his heard and comprehended signs." Among these signs, creation itself stands as the greatest proof of God's existence. Nature, and our study of it, proclaims that there is one God who brought the universe into being and continues to sustain it. To ignore or deny this truth is to deny the obvious. The universe, with its precise order and profound meaning, can be explained only as the work of a creator of boundless intelligence, not as the product of nothing or no one, nor as a result of blind random accidents. The word ayah, meaning sign, and its related forms appear over 350 times in the Quran. It is used in several different contexts, from creation, language, and revelation itself. Each of these signs serves as both a lesson and a testament to God's existence, power, and control. In modern scholarship, the field of semiotics examines how signs and symbols convey meaning. It explores how people interpret and understand signs, whether words, images, sounds, or objects, and how meaning is constructed and communicated. In semiotic theory, every sign consists of two essential elements: the signifier, the form that the sign takes, a word, image, sound, etc. The signified, the concept or meaning that the sign represents. A typical example given is a red traffic light, the red traffic light being the signifier, and the idea of stop is what is signified. Together, they form a sign that communicates a message in the context of traffic. The Quranic paradigm teaches that the entire world is made up of signs. We can categorize them into three major groups. 1. Signs in creation. The Quran repeatedly refers to natural phenomena as signs of God's creative power and control. From the innumerable species of fish, mammals, and birds, to the alternation of night and day, and the intricate design of the heavens and the earth, these signs invite reflection and recognition of God's existence, oneness, and greatness. 2. Revelation as a sign. Every verse of the Quran is referred to as a sign, showing its divine origin and purpose as a sign for humanity. The Quranic signs are not merely words, they are profound messages that guide, warn, and inspire. This underscores the idea that the Quran itself, in its language, structure, and content, is a miraculous sign that challenges humanity to recognize its inimitable nature. 3. Signs in human experience. Beyond the natural world and revelation, the Quran identifies events in history, personal experiences, and the lives of prophets as signs. These are reminders of God's presence and his control over human affairs, serving as lessons for those willing to reflect. For example, the stories of past nations that faced consequences for their disbelief are described as signs for future generations. Dr. Umar al-Ashkar writes, "The Quran takes us on one journey after another through the horizons of the heavens and the different parts of the earth, pausing to consider the flowers of the meadows, taking us up to the stars in their orbits. In this way, it opens our eyes and our hearts, showing us how the power and decree of God operate in his creation, uncovering for us the mysteries of creation, guiding us to the wisdom behind creation, and explaining the immense blessings which He has bestowed upon us and the universe around us. An ayah is stronger than an argument. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of the night and the day are signs for those of understanding. These signs are more than just lessons and evidence. They serve as catalysts, awakening something deeply embedded within us. Their impact is stronger than that of a traditional argument. For example, philosophical arguments about God's existence often lead to general conclusions and remain open to endless debate because they arise from cognitive reasoning. In contrast, the signs of God are powerful, tangible markers that resonate deeply within the human soul. They go beyond mere human reasoning and touch something innately embedded within us, something placed by God Himself. The more one reflects and contemplates these signs, the stronger one's faith grows, because these signs speak directly to the self-affirming in ways that no constructed argument can ever replicate. This inner awareness of God can be compared to how certain emotions, like love, awaken from within us rather than something being taught. For example, when a man first falls in love with a woman, he often goes through a series of emotions, from infatuation to deep attachment. Yet, is this experience unique to him? Could this be due to his upbringing or cultural background? Or do all people who fall in love experience similar emotions? The answer is that love is a deep emotion that is not merely learned or acquired, but is inherent within each of us. From the moment we experience love, the feelings and emotions associated with it, joy, longing, compassion, and even vulnerability begin to surface naturally. These emotions are not forced or manufactured. They are born organically, as if love itself is a key unlocking something deep within us. The fact that love so deeply moves every person, regardless of who they are or where they come from, demonstrates that it is woven into the very essence of our being. This also holds true for a mother's love for her child. Can we attribute this love to social conditioning or learned behavior, or is it something innate in every mother? This love existed as seeds within her, and the experiences of pregnancy and childbirth awaken and nurture it, revealing the deep, innate love woven into her very being from the beginning. We can take other examples to further illustrate this point. The human tongue. It is made up of various taste receptors for sweet, salty, bitter, or sour foods. There is a deliberate proportioning of these taste receptors, each evoking emotions linked to these sensations. A sweet taste may trigger feelings of comfort or pleasure, while a bitter one may evoke caution or dislike. This link between physical sensations and emotions shows a deep connection between the body and mind, demonstrating that our very biology is designed to influence our emotional landscape. A slight difference in the proportion of sweet taste receptors would directly influence our emotional responses. Likewise, the human nose has about 400 types of olfactory receptors, which work together to detect countless odors, each triggering a unique emotional response. The scent of perfume or flowers can evoke feelings of comfort, whilst repugnant smells would typically evoke emotions such as disgust, aversion, or nausea, like the smell of rotting food or decaying flesh. Through our eyes, we experience powerful emotions: joy at the sight of a blooming flower, peace in a blue sky, or awe before a breathtaking landscape. All these form part of a universal design embedded within us. Dr. Umar al-Ashkar writes, "This universe is an open book of truth which can be read in every language and understood by all means. It can be understood by ordinary people living in tents and huts, and by city dwellers living in apartments and palaces. Each person can understand it according to his own level and potential and find in it some support for the truth when he searches it with the purpose of finding the truth. God has created everything on earth for our benefit. It is He who created for you all of that which is on the earth. The endless variety of flowers, the multitudes of animals, birds and fish, every aspect of creation is a sign of God. Each sign, when contemplated, becomes a catalyst that stirs the latent knowledge God has woven into us. These understandings are not acquired from the outside, they already dwell within us, awaiting only our reflection upon the signs to awaken and unfold. Iman, key to understanding God's signs. Say, look at what there is in the heavens and on earth, but signs and warnings will not benefit the people who do not believe. Yet to benefit from his signs, the heart must first carry faith, for even the faintest spark of faith can ignite the soul's journey toward discovering God. As that faith deepens, the ability to perceive and appreciate his signs grows stronger. It is a reciprocal relationship. The more your faith increases, the more you recognize and comprehend God's signs, and in turn, those signs further increase and strengthen your faith. The dynamic here is one of interdependence, where faith facilitates insight, while insight nurtures and strengthens faith. This feedback loop solidifies the epistemic foundations of God's realization, in which faith interacts with our rationality. Faith does not create new signs, it reveals the meaning already woven into them. Signs, light for the heart. The activity of the human mind fundamentally depends on the presence of these signs. Our thoughts, ideas, and emotions require connections through associations. Such associations organize cognitive structures, allowing us to make sense of the world and navigate it effectively. They act as a scaffold for understanding, revealing the deeper meaning embedded in the signs, which manifest as light. The meaning that emerges from the signs of God represents a higher form of light transcending the physical realm. Sa'id ibn Ali al-Qahtani, author of the well-known Hisnul Muslim, writes, "There are two types of light. The first type is empirical light that exists in the physical world. The second type is the semiotic light that is perceived through the spiritual heart. Inner vision perceives this light through the heart, just as the eye perceives physical forms through sight." Ibn al-Qayyim explains, "There is light that is intelligible and processed by the eyes of the heart, and there is physical light that is perceived through the physical eyes." The connection between light and meaning is also evident within the English language, where we describe those who acquire knowledge as being enlightened. Physical light illuminates our surroundings, while spiritual light provides us with knowledge of God, enabling us to journey toward Him. Both the signs and the meanings they represent emit light. The light reflected from a physical sign is processed by the physical eye, while the light of meaning is perceived by the spiritual eyes of the heart. As the Quran states, "It is not the eyes that are blind, but rather it is the hearts in the chests that are blind." When this light is perceived by the heart, a person becomes enlightened. Acting in accordance with this light allows it to radiate through their actions. They become a sign for others, as their righteous actions reflect the light that first entered their heart. For example, when someone is moved by God's mercy, they perceive this light with their heart's eyes. When they embody this quality by showing love and compassion, perhaps to an orphan, they are channeling that light into their actions. As they act, their entire being radiates the same light that once touched their heart, and those around them benefit from it. Ibn al-Qayyim elaborates, "This is why the Prophet asked his Lord so fervently to put light in his flesh and bones, muscles, hair and skin, his hearing and sight, above and beneath him, on his right and on his left, behind him and before him, saying, 'And make of me light.' In short, he would ask his Lord to make every particle of his inner and outer being into light. When the heart perceives the signs of God, knowledge transforms into conviction, and conviction into action. Awareness of divine signs reshapes one's way of living. The believer no longer moves through a meaningless world, but through a living book written by the Creator. Thus, the perception of God's signs does not merely inform the mind. It reforms the person, aligning thought, emotion, and deed with the rhythm of divine order. Sayyid Qutb beautifully notes, "Mankind is part of this universe, and their life cannot be sound or healthy unless their hearts beat with the rhythm of the universe and are connected to the rhythm of this great universe. There has to be a connection between their hearts and everything they learn about one of the stars or planets, or about the characteristics of plants and animals, or the characteristics of the entire universe in general. In truth, every sign is a bridge between the visible and the unseen, a sign through which the intellect awakens and the soul remembers. The believer does not merely observe creation, but reads it, discerning meaning in every atom and purpose in every motion. Through these signs, faith and reason meet. One illuminates the other until both converge in recognition of God's greatness. The universe forms a single tapestry of ayat, each thread pointing to the same eternal truth, that God is, and there is no doubt. Chapter 3. Doubt and Certainty. Human beings live between two powerful forces, doubt and certainty. Between them lies the battlefield of the heart and mind. Doubt whispers confusion, questions and fears. Certainty brings peace, purpose and conviction. Every person struggles between these states. In this chapter, we explore the nature of doubt, what it is, where it comes from, and how it affects the heart and mind. We will examine how Islam distinguishes between emotional unease, intellectual uncertainty, and yaqeen, certainty, its levels, its spiritual significance, and how it transforms a believer's relationship with God. Doubt. In English, doubt refers to a feeling of uncertainty or a lack of conviction. In Arabic, there are two words commonly translated as doubt, raib and shak. Raib conveys the emotional experience associated with doubt, while shak refers to the doubt itself. The polar opposite of shak is yaqeen, conviction. Doubt can arise in different ways. It may stem from a person's own mind, be shaped by the influence of others, or may emerge from genuine uncertainties in the evidence itself. For instance, one might question the authenticity of a manuscript, either due to personal skepticism, the suggestion of another, or in some cases, their doubt may be justified. Spiritually, doubt is considered a disease of the qalb, heart, and the sins an individual commits directly affect their ability to attain certainty in faith. There is a strong correlation between sin and the heart's capacity to comprehend metaphysical truths, as sins cloud the heart and diminish its ability to attain yaqeen, certainty. Yaqeen, certainty, is the antithesis of doubt. While doubt leads to anxiety, sadness, and even depression, yaqeen cultivates serenity, happiness, and inner peace. For example, if you are traveling to an unfamiliar destination and become lost, you are likely to feel tense and agitated, as these emotions are rooted in fear of the unknown. In contrast, when you know exactly where you're going, you are confident, certain of your path, and you experience contentment and ease. Certainty eliminates the stress that comes from uncertainty and brings about a deep sense of assurance. Agnostics and atheists experience frustration, anxiety, and even depression, often subconsciously, stemming from the lack of answers to life's existential questions. In contrast, certainty in knowledge of one's creator and the afterlife profoundly transforms a person's perspective, outlook, and mindset. Feelings of doubt versus certainty. Firstly, feelings associated with uncertainty do not necessarily indicate real doubt. They do not inherently prove that there is something wrong with the subject in question. Rather, uncertainty is a cognitive response that may be justified or unjustified, depending on the context. It reflects the mind's engagement with ambiguity, but not all uncertainty points to actual flaws or issues. Feelings of uncertainty regarding faith in God, Islam, or the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, should be considered from this perspective. The issue may reside in the individual rather than in the absence of convincing evidence. When subjective certainty does not align with objective truth, it suggests an imbalance within the person's mind or environment. Take, for example, someone who experienced trauma involving religious authority figures during childhood. Because of these past social circumstances, their mind has formed an emotional link between religion and trauma. As a result, when this person encounters their faith later in life, it can trigger an anxiety response, leading to emotions that may be misinterpreted as uncertainty or doubt. This emotional reaction, rather than rational evaluation, shapes their sense of unease. Secondly, experiencing uncomfortable fleeting thoughts does not contradict certainty. In fact, it can serve as evidence of faith. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was asked, "O Messenger of God, verily we perceive in our minds that which any one of us would consider too grave to even express." The Prophet replied, "Do you really have such thoughts?" They said, "Yes." Upon this, he said, "That is the manifestation of faith." Imam an-Nawawi explains that such thoughts, paradoxically, are signs of strong iman, faith. He explains that a person's discomfort with these involuntary thoughts reflects that they are protective of their faith and wish to ensure its security. The unease and blasphemous feeling arise precisely because faith is present. Without it, these thoughts wouldn't provoke any inner conflict or anxiety. As for the origin of these thoughts, he cites Qadi Iyad, who explains them as whispers from Shaitan, aimed at those he has failed to misguide. Out of frustration, Shaitan resorts to these whispers, a sign of his defeat in leading the person astray. A person who is a victim of unfounded doubt may believe that the matter at hand is factually correct, yet bound by their distorted mindset, they remain in doubt, fearing they could be wrong. Despite being well-educated and logically sound, vague doubts cloud their judgment, keeping them in a state of uncertainty. This internal struggle is also common on the path toward recognizing God. A seeker may find themselves torn between doubt and conviction, wanting to believe, yet pulled toward doubt by various factors, creating inner conflict. Ibn Taymiyyah advised Ibn al-Qayyim, "Do not let your heart be a sponge for every doubt and allegation, so that it absorbs them and is moistened with nothing else. Instead, make your heart like solid glass. Doubts pass over its surface, but do not settle on the inside. Thus, the doubts are seen through the clearness of the glass, but are repelled by its firmness. Otherwise, if you allow your heart to drink every doubt you encounter, it will end up affirming them." Levels of yaqin, certainty. The Quran describes 3 levels of yaqin, certainty. 1. Ilm al-yaqin, certainty as the result of knowledge. 2. Ayn al-yaqin, empirical certainty. 3. Haq al-yaqin, certainty gained through experience. Prophet Ibrahim asked God to show him how he gives life to the dead and justified his request by stating, "I ask, so that my heart can be reassured." Scholars explain that Prophet Ibrahim wished to ascend from Ilm al-Yaqin to Ayn al-Yaqin. Commenting on this verse, Ibn Hajar writes, "It can be understood that he, Ibrahim, asked to increase his yaqin, not to say that he was doubtful before. Knowledge has levels of strength, and he intended to ascend from Ilm al-Yaqin to Ayn al-Yaqin. Achieving yaqin allows a believer to benefit from the signs of God. God says, "And in the earth are signs for those who are certain, have yaqin." He specifies that only those with certainty will be able to benefit from the signs and proofs. Therefore, a person who attains yaqin, certainty, is never heedless of God and sees his signs in everything. Junaid al-Baghdadi said, "Yaqin is the internalization, istiqrar, of knowledge that will not turn, change, or waver in the heart." Yaqin is not merely a theoretical state designed to ease our insecurities. It plays a crucial and practical role in our lives. It serves as a powerful motivator, directly shaping and driving our actions. When we possess certainty, it fuels confidence and purpose, guiding us to act with clarity and determination. Ibn al-Qayyim explains that yaqeen is the spirit of the actions of the heart, which are the spirit of the actions of the body. Yaqeen, certainty, is meant to inspire us with the courage necessary to act in the world in accordance with what we believe. He says, if it weren't for yaqeen, no one would choose to embark on the journey to God. Moreover, it is only through it, yaqeen, that a person is able to stand firm on the path. Attaining yaqeen is a divine blessing. It cannot be achieved by virtue of the person's own ability, but it is solely a gift from God granted to those whom He favors. When a sincere seeker, after struggling with confusion and doubt, finally attains yaqeen, certainty, the heart is illuminated by nur, light. From this iman, faith, emerges a deep conviction that strengthens the will with unshakable determination. It gives rise to love in its purest form, a divine love. From this iman, faith, also springs a hope so powerful that it endures any storm, empowering the believer with the courage to face the trials of the dunya, world. When the heart attains yaqeen, knowledge of God ceases to be theoretical and becomes experiential. The believer no longer knows of God merely through signs and proofs, but perceives His presence in every aspect of creation and within the depths of the self. This certainty anchors the soul against confusion. Thus, the journey from shak, doubt, to yaqeen is, in truth, the journey from knowing about God to knowing God, a transformation that produces unwavering conviction in the ultimate truth, that there is no doubt in the existence of God. Chapter 4. Evolution, pseudoscience and science fiction. For over a century, evolution has been paraded as the ultimate triumph of science over religion. Yet when examined through the lens of reason and evidence, the theory collapses under its own weight. Far from disproving God, it stands as one of the greatest deceptions in modern intellectual history. This chapter dismantles the illusion of evolution as a settled science by exposing its contradictions, missing evidence, and dependence on unproven assumptions. When considered without bias, the facts of biology, genetics, and physics affirm not chaos and chance, but order, intelligence, design, and the unmistakable reality of a creator. The theory of evolution. The Oxford University Press defines evolution as the gradual process by which different kinds of living organisms develop and diversify from earlier forms during the history of the Earth. This definition emphasizes the biological aspect of evolution, particularly how species adapt over time in response to environmental changes. Originally proposed by Charles Darwin in his 1859 book On the Origin of Species, the theory of evolution explains the existence and diversification of species as interconnected branches that trace back to basic cells in aquatic waters. The theory suggests how species evolve over time through processes such as natural selection, where advantageous traits are preserved and passed on to future generations. In this way, one could explain the existence of various species without invoking a creator. Instead, the creator of each species would be considered its predecessor, from which it supposedly evolved. As Richard Dawkins said, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. We can summarize the main evidence used by proponents of the theory of evolution as follows. 1. Fossil record. They argue that the fossil record provides a wealth of evidence for the existence of extinct species and the transitional forms that illustrate the gradual changes in species over time. They state that the fossils show clear patterns of organisms appearing in a particular order, with simpler forms found in older layers and more complex forms in more recent layers. 2. Comparative anatomy. They state that comparative anatomy reveals striking similarities in the structures of different species, providing evidence for common ancestry. Homologous structures, such as the pentadactyl limb structure found in mammals, suggest a shared evolutionary history and indicate descent from a common ancestor. 3. Embryology. They say that the embryological development often exhibits similarities among different species, reflecting shared developmental pathways. The presence of embryonic features that resemble ancestral traits and the occurrence of vestigial structures in embryos support the evolutionary connection between species. 4. Biogeography. The distribution of species across different geographical regions, they say, is consistent with evolutionary patterns. The presence of related species in close proximity and the absence of certain species in isolated regions can be explained by migration, adaptation, and speciation over time. 5. Genetic evidence. They argue that the DNA and genetic analysis provide powerful evidence for evolution. Comparative genomics demonstrates the presence of shared genetic sequences among different species, indicating common ancestry. Genetic mutations, changes in DNA over generations, can be traced and used to construct evolutionary relationships and timelines. An evolutionary biologist would typically explain the process of evolution as follows. Species evolving into other species would occur through a process called speciation, which occurs over a multitude of generations as populations adapt to their environments. This would begin with genetic variation within a species, which arises from mutations, gene recombination, and other factors. These variations would provide different traits among individuals, some of which offer survival or reproductive advantages in certain environments. Then, over a period of millions of years, natural selection would favor individuals with advantageous traits, allowing them to reproduce more successfully and pass those traits to future generations. Additionally, random genetic changes, known as genetic drift, would further alter the gene pool, especially in smaller populations. When a population becomes geographically or reproductively isolated, it stops exchanging genes with the original group. Over many generations, this isolation would lead to significant genetic divergence between populations. As these genetic differences would accumulate, the isolated population would become so distinct that even if it were to reunite with the original group, they would no longer be able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring. This would mark the creation of a new species. The process is typically gradual, taking thousands to millions of years, and occurs in various ways, such as through geographic separation, allopatric speciation, or through ecological or behavioral changes within the same environment, sympatric speciation. The example of Darwin's finches is often given to demonstrate this, where species evolved different traits, such as beak size, to adapt to distinct ecological niches on the Galapagos Islands. In summary, evolutionary theory maintains that the gradual accumulation of genetic changes and adaptations over vast spans of time has led to the diversification of life, branching from common ancestors into the multitude of species observed today, through random processes that are unguided and without foresight. Richard Dawkins writes, "Natural selection, the blind, unconscious, automatic process which Darwin discovered and which we now know is the explanation for the existence and apparently purposeful form of all life, has no purpose in mind. It has no mind and no mind's eye. It does not plan for the future. It has no vision, no foresight, no sight at all. If it can be said to play the role of watchmaker in nature, it is the blind watchmaker." Fossil records. If the theory of evolution is correct and accurate, then we should naturally expect to find ample evidence in the fossil record. As animals are supposedly evolving and incremental physical changes are happening, we should find innumerable fossils demonstrating animals transitioning as they are evolving. However, not only do we find no fossil evidence despite there being millions of various types of animals, we find the exact opposite, fossils of complete and fully formed animals. We find long periods of stability and sudden appearances of fully formed species. This phenomenon, known as stasis, contradicts the expectation of slow, incremental changes that the theory of evolution predicts. Stasis in the fossil record refers to a pattern where species appear to remain relatively unchanged over long periods of geological time, showing little or no significant morphological, physical alteration for millions of years. The absence of transitional fossils, the intermediate forms between major groups of species, directly challenges evolutionary theory. The Cambrian explosion, 541 million years ago, is a phenomenon in the fossil record which contradicts evolution. Stephen C. Meyer highlights the Cambrian explosion in his book, Darwin's Doubt, The Explosive Origin of Animal Life and the Case for Intelligent Design, that the fossil record prior to the Cambrian period shows little evidence of the complex life forms that suddenly appear during this explosion. He argues that there is an absence of transitional forms leading to the Cambrian fauna, disproving the idea that these species evolved gradually. According to Meyer, this sudden burst of biological diversity is more consistent with the idea of an intelligent agent introducing complex organisms than with the slow and gradual changes posited by evolutionary theory. This rapid diversification of life forms, often referred to as biological Big Bang, is difficult to explain through the slow, gradual processes of natural selection. This lack of gradual, transitional fossils shows that evolution is not the mechanism through which species appeared. Stephen Jay Gould, the renowned paleontologist at Harvard University and one of the most influential evolutionary biologists of the 20th century, admits, "The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils." In fact, Charles Darwin acknowledged this problem himself, calling the lack of transitional fossils in the record the gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. He admitted that the incomplete nature of the fossil record made it difficult to demonstrate the slow, incremental changes his theory proposed. It has been over 140 years since his death, and yet the fundamental problem remains. The fossil record still does not display the countless transitional forms that Darwin himself expected. Instead of revealing a gradual, continuous chain of life, the evidence shows sudden appearances and fully formed species. Despite decades of searching, the predicted missing links remain elusive, leaving this core weakness unresolved and casting major doubt on the claim that evolution can account for the origin and diversity of life. An objective and thorough study of nature reveals serious gaps, unanswered questions, and inconsistencies that expose the irrational and illogical basis of such claims. To illustrate this, let us pose a few simple yet rational questions using the example of the elephant. Evolutionary biologists claim that modern elephants evolved from a group of extinct mammals known as proboscideans. The earliest ancestor of elephants is supposed to be a small semi-aquatic mammal called Merotherium, which lived around 37 million years ago. Merotherium is allegedly smaller than modern elephants, and it resembled a hippopotamus with no long trunk and short legs. Over time, the descendants of Merotherium are gradually meant to have evolved larger body sizes, tusks, and trunks, adapting to changing environmental conditions. The following is the hypothetical and alleged timeline for the animal with no trunk to evolve to an elephant, with a trunk spanning tens of millions of years. 1. Merotherium, 37 million years ago. This early ancestor, which lived during the late Eocene epoch, had no trunk. Merotherium was a small, semi-aquatic mammal, more like a tapir or hippo, with a short snout, and it did not yet have the distinctive long trunk we associate with modern elephants. 2. Paleomastodon, 30 million years ago. About 7 million years later, during the Oligocene epoch, the Paleomastodon evolved with a slightly longer snout. It was not a full trunk, but it was a precursor to it. This early stage shows the gradual elongation of the face and nose. 3. Gomphotheres, 20 to 10 million years ago. By the Miocene epoch, species like the Gomphotheres began to evolve a more recognizable trunk. This period marked a significant transition in the development of the trunk and tusks. Gomphotheres had a longer trunk. 4. Modern elephants, 5 million years ago to present. The fully developed trunk as we see it today in modern elephants, African and Asian species, likely emerged by the late Miocene or early Pliocene, around 5 million years ago. The trunk became a versatile organ, used for feeding, drinking, social interaction, and more. Introspection. How did the intermediate forms of the trunk provide survival benefits if they were only partially functional during the transition? Given the complexity of such changes, how do we account for the coordination between multiple anatomical systems, muscle, nerve, bone, evolving simultaneously? Are such transformations the result of conscious or intentional choices by animals? Do they possess the ability to deliberately reshape their anatomy? Are they aware of the processes that would enable them to alter their DNA across multiple generations until the desired outcome? Humans, for example, have practiced circumcision for thousands of years, yet their sons continue to be born with foreskins. Are there examples in the fossil record of similar large, complex organs developing slowly? We should expect to find millions of fossils in various intermediate stages of evolution, each showing incremental changes. Do we find any living animals in these intermediary stages? Missing links, fake fossils, and anthropology's greatest hoax. During the 20th century, several fossil discoveries, once celebrated as the definitive proof of human evolution, were later proven to be hoaxes, fabricated specimens that deceived both the scientific community and the public for decades. These forgeries were presented as conclusive evidence of missing links in the fossil record, showing transitional forms between major groups such as fish and amphibians, reptiles and birds, and apes and humans. These forgeries had a catastrophic impact on scientific thought, misleading researchers for nearly 40 years and shaping evolutionary reconstructions, though all were later shown to be fakes. Two notable examples: Piltdown Man, Eoanthropus dawsoni, the most famous hoax, discovered by Charles Dawson in 1912 in Sussex, England. It was hailed as the missing link between ape and man, with a human-like skull and an ape-like jaw. In 1953, it was exposed as a fraud using advanced testing, which revealed that the skull was a composite. The cranium of a modern human and the jaw of an orangutan and filed-down teeth stained to appear ancient. Reference: The official scientific paper that exposed the hoax was Weiner, J.S., Oakley, K.P., and Legros-Clark, W.E., 1953. The Solution of the Piltdown Problem, Bulletin of the British Museum, Natural History. Also refer to Spencer F. Piltdown, A Scientific Forgery, Oxford University Press, a detailed scholarly look on how and why the fraud succeeded for decades. Nebraska Man, Hesperopithecus Harold Cookie, A Tooth Becomes a Man, discovered in 1917 in Nebraska, USA, by Harold Cook. A single tooth was used to reconstruct an entire primitive human ancestor, dubbed Nebraska Man. By 1927, the tooth was proven to belong not to a human, but to a pig. Nebraska Man became a textbook example of scientific error and overinterpretation based on scant evidence. Comparative anatomy. Similarities in anatomical structures across species do not point to common ancestry, but rather to a common design strategy. Just as an engineer will use effective design principles across different machines to achieve optimal functionality, God employed similar structures in various species to accomplish specific biological functions. The existence of homologous structures across diverse species indicates that similar biological challenges or environmental pressures are solved with similar design solutions, just as different vehicles might use similar components like wheels, despite being built for different purposes. Dr. Michael Denton, in his book, Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, writes, "The idea of homology as a result of common descent is far from proven. There are many examples where similar structures are found in species that are not closely related in evolutionary terms. The evidence is more consistent with the idea of a common design than with a common ancestry. Shared features across species point to efficient, purposeful designs tailored to their needs, rather than to a process driven purely by unguided, random changes over time. The recurring patterns observed in comparative anatomy are better explained as evidence of a common designer than of common descent." Dr. Paul Nelson notes, "The fact that we find similar anatomical structures in widely different organisms can be attributed to an intelligent designer using optimal design principles, rather than these similarities being the result of random mutations passed down through common descent." Embryology. As with anatomical similarities, resemblance in embryological development across different species should be understood not as evidence of a common evolutionary ancestry, but rather as evidence of a common design blueprint. Similarities in early embryonic stages, referred to as embryonic recapitulation by evolutionists, have historically been overstated in support of evolutionary theory and has now been widely discredited. While different species may share certain embryonic stages, these features can also be interpreted as efficient and functional design elements necessary for successful development. Stephen Jay Gould, a proponent of evolution, acknowledges in his book Ontogeny and Phylogeny the theory of recapitulation, which claims that ontogeny, the development of an organism, recapitulates phylogeny, the evolutionary history of the species, has been largely discredited as a literal explanation of embryonic development. While there are echoes of evolutionary history in the developmental stages of embryos, the strict recapitulation hypothesis is overly simplistic and has been abandoned by most biologists. The presence of similar embryological features can show that these developmental processes are effective mechanisms for constructing complex organisms, regardless of their final forms. Regarding so-called vestigial structures, such as the appendix in humans, which is often claimed to have lost its original function, the assumption that a structure is a remnant of evolutionary history simply because it serves a different or unclear purpose in one species compared to another is flawed thinking. The absence of current understanding does not imply a lack of function. In fact, recent scientific discoveries have overturned the long-standing belief that the appendix is useless, revealing that it plays a significant role in the immune system and contributes to maintaining gut health. So these structures still serve subtle, less obvious purposes, or simply reflect a design choice that allows for greater flexibility or adaptability within various organisms. What appears vestigial in one context may serve a different, still undiscovered function in another. Likewise, the similar stages observed in embryology point to a purposeful design plan, rather than to shared evolutionary ancestry. Biogeography. Evolutionists often point to Darwin's finches, a group of bird species found on the Galapagos Islands, as a classic example of adaptive radiation and natural selection in action. Charles Darwin observed that the finches had developed different beak shapes and sizes, depending on their particular feeding habits. He saw these variations in beak morphology as arising from small, gradual changes over time, allowing the finches to adapt to different ecological scenarios. Evolutionists argue that this diversification from a common ancestor illustrates how species can evolve in response to environmental pressures, with natural selection favoring traits that enhance survival and reproduction. This phenomenon is commonly referred to as microevolution. It is important to note that microevolution does not demonstrate one species evolving into a completely different species. The variations in traits such as size, color, or shape still occur within the boundaries of the same species. As Muslims, we believe that any changes that occur to any species is part of the original design by God. In addition, it is important to remember the critical point that God remains actively involved in the maintenance of creation. We do not believe God is the unmoved mover, as Aristotle believed, a prime cause that initiated the universe but is not involved in its day-to-day operations or directly concerned with human affairs. Rather, God created each species and remains intimately involved in sustaining all their needs. If He wills, He can bring about subtle adaptations to enable species to meet the demands of environmental changes, always maintaining His active role in guiding and nurturing His creation. Genetic evidence. This argument often points to striking genetic similarities across the animal kingdom, particularly the claim that the human and chimpanzee genomes are 99% identical. Prominent atheists such as Richard Dawkins frequently cite this high degree of genetic similarity to support arguments for common descent. Yet what is often missing from mainstream discourse is a more nuanced understanding of what this striking genetic similarity actually signifies. When we first encounter arguments about genetic similarity, it's easy to be persuaded by the simplicity of a figure like 99% similarity. However, a closer examination of the scientific literature quickly reveals that this claim is not supported by the actual evidence. Chris Moran, professor of animal genetics at the University of Sydney, explains, "Depending upon what it is that you are comparing, you can say, yes, there's a very high degree of similarity, for example, between a human and a pig protein coding sequence. But if you compare rapidly evolving non-coding sequences from a similar location in the genome, you may not recognize any similarity at all. This means that blanket comparisons of all DNA sequences between species are not very meaningful. The gap between what is presented in scientific literature and what is reported to the public can be vast. Scientific findings are often reduced to simplistic sound bites for public consumption, shaped by their atheistic worldview. In such cases, these oversimplifications warrant critical scrutiny, for comparing two genomes is anything but straightforward. For instance, no study has ever compared 100% of the human and chimp genomes. Instead, researchers had focused on subsections of the genome. In some cases, including the landmark 1975 study by King and Wilson that first reported 99% similarity, the compared regions account for less than 2% of the total genome. Crucially, studies only examine proteins, which reflect the coding portion of the genome, while entirely missing non-coding regions, which amount to 98% of the human genome. The coding portion of DNA encodes proteins, the fundamental building blocks of bodily function, and less than 2% of DNA is involved in this coding process. Evolutionists claim that these non-coding regions of the genome, 98% of our DNA, are simply junk. They argue that since non-coding regions did not directly contribute to protein formation, these segments of DNA are assumed to have no biological function. This is an acute example of intellectual arrogance, rejecting what they do not understand. Even if one were to concede that non-coding regions of the genome serve no biological function, it is still misleading to claim that human and chimp DNA are 99% identical. A more accurate rendering of their findings would be, human and chimp DNA is 99% similar within the 2% of the genome that was actually compared. Framed in this way, the headline loses much of its dramatic appeal and is hardly the earth-shattering revelation it is made out to be. In fact, many of the key assumptions the major chimp-human genome research papers made in determining 99% similarity have since proved to be erroneous or misleading. The underlying logic is that we should expect a high amount of genetic overlap among organisms that have evolved from each other. However, you will be surprised to learn that there is 60% overlap of human genes with those of fruit flies. 31% is shared with yeast. Can we use this as evidence of common descent? Furthermore, when examining mice, we find that approximately 99% of their genes have human counterparts, with 80% of human genes overlapping. Cats exhibit about 90% genetic similarity to humans, while dogs share around 85%. To emphasize this point even further, humans also share roughly 60% of their genes with bananas. How should we interpret these percentages? Would any rational person assert that the 60% genetic similarity we share with bananas suggests that humans, at some point in their evolutionary history, were bananas or that different species originated from bananas? Surely no one would make such a claim. The reality is that the shared DNA code across species points to a common designer. Just as different computer programs written in the same language reflect a singular source, the similarities in anatomy, behavior, and genetic code among living beings testify to the same designer. Finally, a note on genetic mutations. These are random errors in an organism's DNA, the result of copying mistakes, radiation, or chemical damage. Evolutionists claim that over time, natural selection sifts through these mistakes, keeping the rare beneficial ones and discarding the harmful to gradually build new traits and even entire species. Yet the reality is stark. The vast majority of mutations are either useless or destructive, breaking systems rather than creating them. To insist that the slow accumulation of such random errors could assemble the astonishingly precise and interdependent systems of life, like the human eye or the immune system, is not science but wishful thinking. Far from being a creative force, mutations overwhelmingly point to decay, disorder, and death. Common ancestor. There is consensus among anthropologists, geneticists, and biologists that all human beings, without exception, have descended from a common ancestral pair, a single man and woman. Biologists cite the following evidence to show that all humans have a common ancestor. DNA similarity. Humans share approximately 99.9% of their DNA with each other, indicating a common ancestor. Mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA. All humans inherit mitochondrial DNA from their mothers, and studies of mtDNA suggest that all living humans can trace their ancestry back to a single woman, often referred to as mitochondrial Eve. Y chromosome analysis. The Y chromosome, which is passed from father to son, shows that all men can trace their lineage back to a single male ancestor, often called Y chromosomal Adam. Genetic markers. Shared genetic markers and mutations among human populations provide evidence of a common ancestry. Why should we expect this to happen if evolution is true? What happened to all the other species of humans with their own distinct lines of ancestry? Evolutionists argue that all these became extinct, with only the fittest surviving. Again, this is an ad hoc attempt to account for the monumental gaps in the evidence. If evolution occurred in isolated, disconnected blind processes, why do all modern humans trace back to a single set of common ancestors? Evolutionary biologists admit that the idea that humans evolved from different ancestors, polygenism, is not supported by the evidence. The genetic evidence overwhelmingly supports the idea that all humans are closely related and share a recent common ancestor. If humans had evolved from different ancestors, we would expect to see much greater genetic diversity and distinct lineages, which we do not observe. In addition, the anatomical and developmental similarities among all humans are consistent with a single origin. If humans had evolved from different ancestors, we would expect to see greater anatomical and developmental differences among human populations. Irreducible complexity. Having examined the genetic foundations of life, it becomes clear that DNA is not merely a chemical sequence, but a sophisticated information system. Yet, the question naturally arises: how is this genetic information expressed and organized into functioning biological machines? To explore this, we must look deeper into the microscopic structures and interdependent mechanisms within living cells, where we encounter systems so intricately designed that even the smallest alteration would render them useless. This brings us to the concept of irreducible complexity. When we study living organisms and reduce their functions to their most basic biological components, we eventually reach a level where removing any further part causes the entire function to fail. For example, the bacterial flagellum is a microscopic motor made of many interdependent proteins. If even one is missing, the flagellum stops working altogether. Another would be in human cells. The clotting process relies on a precise chain of proteins, clotting factors, that activate one another in sequence. If any key factor is absent, the chain reaction cannot be completed, and a wound will not heal. In essence, this microbiological irreducible complexity shows molecular systems are too complex to have evolved incrementally and must be present from the very outset, for example, designed. It's like an alarm clock that requires all parts working together to tell time and sound alarms. Individual parts cannot perform these functions alone. In his book, Darwin's Black Box, Michael Behe shows how such cellular machines, from the bacterial flagellum to the blood-clotting cascade, cannot be explained by gradual evolution. He argues that these intricate, interdependent systems require all their essential parts to be in place simultaneously, which he believes points to an intelligent designer rather than step-by-step natural selection. The second law of thermodynamics states that in a closed system, entropy, the measure of disorder, tends to increase over time. Put simply, without an external source of energy and organization, things naturally move from order to disorder. This principle is often called the entropy principle. According to this, a system left to itself will not spontaneously become more complex or organized. It will instead drift toward greater randomness. If we apply the entropy principle to biological systems, it raises the question of how simple life forms could transform into more complex organisms purely by chance. The analogy of machines helps illustrate the point. A bicycle cannot gradually transform into a motorcycle without an outside source of energy, planning, and materials. Likewise, a 100 cubic centimeter motorcycle cannot simply increase its engine capacity to 500 cubic centimeters on its own. Both scenarios highlight that complexity and higher performance require the addition of external resources, design, and information. Without these external inputs, the system remains the same or declines. Although raw energy, such as sunlight or heat, can enter a system, energy by itself is insufficient to create organized complexity. Sunlight, for instance, fuels a plant's growth, but the plant can harness that energy only because it already possesses highly ordered structures like chlorophyll molecules and DNA, each containing precise instructions or information. If such information is essential for achieving higher levels of organization, and the physically more complex requires a detailed blueprint to build, the question naturally follows: where does that information originate? Without some guiding mechanism or intelligent input to channel the energy, an influx of energy alone would merely accelerate disorder and decay rather than build new order. Mathematical impossibility. Finally, evolution is a mathematical impossibility. The idea that random matter could assemble itself into even the simplest cell, let alone complex animals, is a probabilistic impossibility. Consider the probability of a fully formed protein arising by chance. Cells are built from proteins, and proteins themselves are chains of amino acids. For a relatively small protein consisting of 100 amino acids, the total number of possible amino acid sequences is 20 to the power of 100. Accordingly, the probability of any one specific sequence arising purely by random combination of the 20 standard amino acids is approximately 1 in 20 to the power of 100, about 10 to the power of minus 130, which is an almost unimaginably small number. If the odds are so minuscule for a single functional protein, What are the chances of this process repeating itself to produce the brain, eyes, ears, millions of species, the sun, the moon, and billions of galaxies? It would be like someone winning the lottery jackpot every single day for an entire lifetime, something everyone would agree is impossible. It is like claiming a fully operational airplane emerged out of a tornado in a junkyard. Would any intelligent person believe this? Yet some would still try to convince you of the possibility. To illustrate this, they use the infinite monkey theorem, which is that if 6 monkeys sat at typewriters and banged on the keys for billions of years, it is not unlikely that in the last pages they wrote we would find one of the sonnets of Shakespeare. This is the case with the universe that exists now. It came about as the result of random forces which played with matter for billions of years. Any talk of this nature is utter nonsense. None of our branches of sciences, until the present day, know what type of accident could produce such a great reality, with all its wonder and beauty. In his book, Man Does Not Stand Alone, American chemist A. Cressy Morrison writes, "So many essential conditions are necessary for life to exist on our Earth that it is mathematically impossible that all of them could exist in proper relationship by chance on any one Earth at one time. Therefore, there must be in nature some form of intelligent direction. If this be true, then there must be a purpose." Summary of key scientific evidence against evolution. 1. Paleontological argument, fossil record. Missing links problem. If evolution were true, there should be millions of fossils of transitional forms. Reality. No transitional forms exist at all. All fossilized animals appear perfect, as complete animals. Darwin's own admission. Darwin acknowledged that if his theory were true, there should be millions of transitional forms in the fossil record. After 100+ years of intensive research, top paleontologists admit there are simply no transitional forms. Biological Big Bang. Instead of gradual evolution, the fossil record shows groups of organisms popping up, complete in geological strata, for example, Cambrian explosion, persisting for periods, then disappearing and being replaced by new forms that are also complete. Living examples. There are also no observable examples in the natural world of one species evolving into a completely different species that we can witness firsthand. Conclusion. There is zero evidence of evolution observable in living animals or in the fossil record. 2. Genetic similarity. The claim that there is 99% similarity of human-chimp DNA is completely misleading. The 99% figure comes from limited studies, for example, King and Wilson, 1975, that compared only protein coding regions, less than 2% of the genome, ignoring 98%. Early biologists dismissed non-coding DNA as junk, assuming no function. Even if that were true, it is inaccurate to claim overall 99% similarity when most of the genome was never compared. Cross-species percentages. Humans share 60% of genes with fruit flies, 31% with yeast, 80% with mice, approximately 90% with cats, approximately 85% with dogs, and approximately 60% with bananas. Such overlaps reflect basic biological necessities, not direct evolutionary descent. Single designer. Broad genetic resemblances across species are better explained as evidence of a single designer using a common genetic language, rather than proof of evolution. 3. Irreducible complexity argument, molecular systems. Cellular systems fail if even one component is removed, meaning they must function as a complete unit from the start. Key examples: bacterial flagellum, a microscopic motor of interdependent proteins that ceases to work if any single protein is missing. Analogy: like an alarm clock that only works when all its parts operate together, these biological machines cannot function through partial, stepwise assembly. 4. Second law of thermodynamics, entropy principle. Entropy tends to increase. In a closed system, disorder naturally grows over time. Without an external organizing force, order and complexity decline. Challenge to evolution. If life arose and became more complex by chance, it would violate the second law of thermodynamics. This law is one of the most well-established principles in physics, and it applies to all known processes, from everyday phenomena to the behavior of molecules. Nothing has been proven to violate the second law of thermodynamics. Machine analogy: a bicycle cannot become a motorcycle, nor can a small engine enlarge itself without external planning, energy, and materials. Complexity requires outside input. Energy versus information. Raw energy, sunlight, heat, cannot create organized complexity on its own. Life exploits energy only because it already contains intricate structures and genetic instructions. Core question: since increasing complexity needs precise information, where does that information originate if not from an intelligent source? 5. Mathematical impossibility. Protein formation. Odds. A modest 100 amino acid protein forming by random chance has a probability of about 2 to the power of -100. Astronomically small. Scaling the improbability. If one protein is so unlikely, the chance of producing complex organs, countless species, and the cosmos itself through random processes is effectively zero. Analogy: like winning the top lottery jackpot every day for a lifetime. In conclusion, the most recent advances in knowledge have overturned many of the certainties that shaped the 20th century collective consciousness. Once regarded as the sole acceptable explanation, evolution is now increasingly viewed as an untenable belief. Even among leading atheist philosophers, it no longer provides a satisfactory framework for understanding nature. Highly acclaimed Professor Thomas Nagel writes in his Mind and Cosmos, "Why the materialist neo-Darwinian conception of nature is almost certainly false, I would like to defend the untutored reaction of incredulity to the reductionist neo-Darwinian account of the origin and evolution of life. It is prima facie highly implausible that life as we know it is the result of a sequence of physical accidents together with the mechanism of natural selection. We are expected to abandon this naive response, not in favor of a fully worked-out physical/chemical explanation, but in favor of an alternative that is really a schema for explanation, supported by some examples. What is lacking to my knowledge is a credible argument that the story has a non-negligible probability of being true. There are two questions. First, given what is known about the chemical basis of biology and genetics, what is the likelihood that self-reproducing life forms should have come into existence spontaneously on the early Earth, solely through the operation of the laws of physics and chemistry? The second question is about the sources of variation in the evolutionary process that was set in motion once life began. In the available geological time since the first life forms appeared on Earth, what is the likelihood that, as a result of physical accident, a sequence of viable genetic mutations should have occurred that was sufficient to permit natural selection to produce the organisms that actually exist? There is much more uncertainty in the scientific community about the first question than about the second. To anyone interested in the basis of this judgment, I can only recommend a careful reading of some of the leading advocates on both sides of the issue, with special attention to what has been established by the critics of intelligent design. Whatever one may think about the possibility of a designer, the prevailing doctrine, that the appearance of life from dead matter and its evolution through accidental mutation and natural selection to its present forms has involved nothing but the operation of physical law, cannot be regarded as unassailable. It is an assumption governing the scientific project, rather than a well-confirmed scientific hypothesis. The evidence is unmistakable. The theory of evolution fails entirely. It is not science, but pseudoscience, imagination masquerading as fact. No genuine evidence exists to uphold it. Rather, every scientific finding testifies to design, intelligence, and purpose, the work of one all-powerful creator. Design requires a designer, intelligence points to an intelligent cause, and life itself testifies to the living God. In every field, from biology to physics, the signs converge upon a single truth. God is not absent from creation, he is its author.